to enjoy being part of the communication that the coach community of practice have put on. I can think back to some topics like leading change, the opportunities COVID gave us to relook at the workplace, just growth. I've really appreciated those. I can see a couple of folk who are on here now have also been part of those. And for me, being able to have a special Seventh-day Adventist group on our own is really special. And when Glenys and Leanne made the offer, we're delighted that we can enjoy this particular program for an hour. And near the end, we'll have 3 conference education directors join us. Jack Ryan from Queensland, Rhonda Belson from the West, and Steve Cowley from South Australia. Because we've all worked very closely with coach communication over the years and have benefited from their expertise. And we are keen, as we share together on this whole idea of building trust and making sure that the values we stand for become part of what happens in the workplace. Mm. So, Leanne and Glenys, thank you for providing this opportunity. We really look forward to what you're going to share. Over to you.
Thank you so much, David, that lovely welcome. It indeed has been a privilege for us as a team over the years to work with you and so many Adventist leaders across the systems, mostly in education. And it's lovely to have this time with you today. Thank you for all you've done to help bring it to pass. And thanks to Lindsay also for your role, Lindsay, in pulling it together with Glenys. And indeed, thanks to all of you who have made time in your precious day and week to spend this hour with us. It would be fair to say that perhaps an invitation to an hour to discuss Safe Work Australia's new guidelines with some people whom you've never met wouldn't exactly be the most scintillating invitation you'll have ever received. But indeed, in our hands and with the particular lens we take, we really hope that it will be an hour that encourages you and leaves you feeling even more equipped and even perhaps excited about leading workplace social safety in the teams and organisations that you support. So before we dive in, I, of course, would love to introduce my wonderful team members here today. Dr. Glenys Drew, our Director, Coach Culture, who has been instrumental in pulling the session together for us. Hello. And Brad Skinner, our Director, Service Design, and Russell Scott, our Director of Programs. So these fabulous executive coaches, organisational developers and leaders, it's my privilege to work with, and along with our broader team and coach, where we work in our particular remit of working with leaders to foster socially safe, trust-filled, high-performance organisations. And that word safe, the words safety and trust that David alluded to, are very dear to our hearts and to our mantra every day in the online programs and face-to-face programs that we deliver to our clients, of course, chiefly amongst them, as David mentioned, Adventist colleagues. So to the guidelines. So Safe Work Australia's new guidelines are addressing workplace violence, aggression and harassment, call upon leaders to prevent, eliminate and minimise psychosocial safety risks. And these 2 guidelines released in February marry the workplace bullying prevention guidelines released in 2016. The challenge and that call to leaders indeed is enormous. If we engage at the moment, for a moment with those 2 words, eliminate risks, when it comes to the most vexing challenge that faces us all in our professional and personal lives, is that of human behaviour. Leaders are not cultivated to become master navigators of human behaviour. And so the challenge and the call to eliminate behaviour risks is complex indeed. Towards that challenge, some terrific research out of the University of Western Sydney conducted by Bowie, Privatera and Bowen, as well as having some of the coolest researcher names around. They have been very instrumental in research. They were keen to develop a framework and a model to prevent workplace violence and aggression and bullying. And out of that work, they've done a key finding and recommendation is that of taking a prevention approach to high-risk behaviours by addressing the low-risk behaviours, if you like, or the low-level behaviours, by calling on leaders to focus on social and interpersonal communication behaviours to skill the workforce in behaviours that help them positively manage and prevent larger scale risks. So the question there is then, what are those behaviours that leaders need to focus on in terms of interpersonal communication that we need to focus on preventing to allow these greater incidence risks to develop? Some more research to help us answer that question conducted by Troy Heffernan out of La Trobe University. Really some quite current research is really interesting and also helps explicate these points. So Heffernan and his colleagues conducted and released the results of a very interesting study across university workplaces recently, identifying a new pattern in what they call smart bullying. And what they mean by smart bullying is patterns of subtle interpersonal communication behaviours that they call incivility, that look like exclusion, that look like, for example, avoiding behaviours, talking behind backs, negative behaviours and responses to others. And it's a really rich match for me and for us in COACH to the research that I've been doing from the applied neurosciences, and indeed that we've been delivering to organisations for the past decade, where we have been obsessively focused on communication behaviours that cause harm to self and other in workplaces, drilling down to really get a practical, meaningful, evidence-based understanding of behaviours that are so unfortunately typically common in organisational workplaces, like making sarcastic or unhelpful retorts, under the breath comments to others, rolling of eyes when a certain person speaks, approaching conversations with a cold face, withholding warmth, a clipped tone of voice in a pattern. All these behaviours really undermine the sense of interpersonal and personal safety and signal a potential threat to the brain. So Heffernan ends his commentary by saying, we know from the research, certainly in university workplaces as the context of his study, that what these patterns are and that they are rising, but nobody knows yet what to do about them. And we in COACH would say, we would, with all due respect to Heffernan's work, beg to differ. And why we want to talk to you today is we want to share with you some of the insights on the tools and approaches we've been taking that we have been deriving significant results from over the past decade to help you as leaders respond to Safe Work Australia's new guidelines. So without further ado, I will leave you in the team's hands with Brad kicking off, if you will, Brad, to share some insights as we start to unpack this challenge and opportunity of fostering safety in our workplaces.
Thanks, Lee. One of the things that I guess the guideline talks about most loudest is the idea that we take a proactive approach. So in terms of workplace safety, sort of physical safety, that feels very black and white for most of us. So you remove a hazard, you fix a broken stair, you make sure that cord is picked up so that someone doesn't trip over it. But I guess for psychological safety, it feels less black and white. And I think in response, many of us would rightly sort of turn to or rely on our suite of workforce policies and procedures that are sort of in place around appropriate behaviour, discrimination, fairness, etc. And I guess those are, of course, must-have foundations. But I think we really need to make sure that they're both understood by all and consistently applied. And moreover, that they're preventative and prevention focused, not post-incident response. So I like to liken it to, I guess you have locks on your front door, but of course you have to use those to be effective from an intruder. Likewise, even with locks, you still have an insurance policy. So I guess the work that we do and the work that we help organizations with is sort of like that insurance. It's behavior change, it's communication skilling, it's awareness and education, and it means that you can be assured that your workplace becomes psychologically safe. And it does so by giving, I guess, a shared voice and amplifies your policies and procedures, and really make sure that people understood what it looks, sounds, and feels like when you are both a recipient of and a deliverer of respectful and professional workplace conversations and interactions. I guess the cost of not doing that, it really is great. Our people, our profitability, our viability, our reputation as an organization, it all rises and falls on the way that we treat our people. And I guess the dollar cost of not doing that is even greater. We commonly see that a single incident of bullying can sometimes be 10 times what the cost of a proactive approach would be at a system-wide implementation. So if you think about that, responding to one incident, just the dollar cost alone, let alone the reputational and the impact on your people, that is potentially 10 times more expensive than what an early intervention or prevention program at a system-wide level would have cost you. So from a real financial assessment, that really makes a sound choice. One example that I wanted to share very quickly, Lee, I was reading only this morning, so this is a little off script, so forgive me, but I'm going to go rogue, is the New South Wales Police. I was reading that in the last 12 months, so between 2019 and 2020, we had, let me double check the number, we had 562 formal complaints about bullying and harassment colleague to colleague. So that's not about what happens in terms of on the beat, that's treatment of staff member to staff member. And that rise alone has resulted in almost 800 officers leaving the force in one single year, and more than half of them medically discharged with what's categorized as a psychological injury, primarily caused by an internal organizational treatment factor. So, and that this loss of talent is just, I guess, one example of where the force has suffered reputational, financial, and lost its employer confidence. Now, interestingly, the commission, they've commissioned a report, and the commission suggested that, and I quote, while the New South Wales had policies, procedures, and guidelines in relation to respectful workplace behaviour, these policies were not understood, not governed, and not well implemented until after the event when the damage had already been done. And so
absolutely,
we need to very much proactive and prevention focused, and certainly the guidelines insist on that. It's a really critical point in terms of assessing how your organisation can best respond to these new guidelines.
And that, Brad, is really consistent with Heffernan's findings also. For instance, the patterns that we've been describing around negative communication behaviours happening in the university context, for instance, as was the context of their study, more frequently upwards and sideways, And indeed, Heffernan noted that these behaviours at this more subtle but abiding and patterned level of occurrence are harmful, I guess doubly harmful because they are so difficult to identify and call out. So HR policies and practitioners aren't catching them. And of course, we are in organisations insufficiently taking people on the journey from policy to practice in daily interpersonal interaction.
And I think it's really fascinating to think that a role such as a police officer and the amount of workplace stress they must experience on the beat, to think that there's such a significant identified psychological impact from an internal conversation or treatment or colleague interaction, I think is particularly fascinating. So it's certainly something that could be easily mitigated and their staff better supported as a consequence.
Absolutely.
This is terrific. Thank you so much, Brad. And I'm glad you went rogue, if that's what it was, because that's a really important point. And the guidelines are very sure on this word about safety. They're talking about safety as multiple dimensions, where we can be put, as you said, putting steps in place to make sure there aren't trips and falls. But there's also sadly, in the health area particularly, need to protect against volatile behaviours of people who the health workers are seeking to assist. So even more so, when there are those extrinsic real challenges to safety, even more so, let us consider how we can make the organisation as self-supporting as well as nurturing as possible, to bind us together in some sort of unity to be able to deflect best the certain types of hazard from the outside. So the part I was going to just have a quick think about here was behaviour change. What sort of behaviour change do we want? Are there aspects that we want to say, absolutely, let's keep doing that, it's working? Are there other areas where we want to say the behaviour could be better? We could be more unified, we could be more respectful, we could be more inclusive. So here the guidelines are saying the important thing to remember is it doesn't just happen by osmosis. This area is so complex, has been said already by Lee, that it needs to have real attention. So the guidelines are saying make sure there's training in place. Make sure the training is about interpersonal skilling, and make sure that that training creates awareness about the impact of one's behaviour on another's and the impact of their behaviour on us as a critical part of being able to be better for each other. And even a problem manifest in an organisation can be turned into a raging solution that makes a huge difference. I've got an example of that I might just share quickly, and that relates to two senior staff members in an organisation I worked in. It was a university. They were both really good people with a lot to offer, and they did offer a great deal in their skills and abilities. However, there'd been a falling out at some point, and the anxiety and animosity was palpable in the air with them, and it was damaging. It affected other people. One of them came to me one day, just on a point of not a confidential matter, but just a point of professional principle where they wanted just a sounding board. And they put the point to me really well. And I thought, that's a really good question. Why don't you ask X? And they were aghast. Oh, no. Well, we don't really talk. No, just ask X. All you need to do is just gather that extra perspective, because he'll have a different perspective. And also just be sure that you value what he does contribute, and you'll probably have a really good conversation. She just said she'd think about it, and she did that. And what I want to say is a simple use of a situation like that can reap profound benefits, because it did repair their relationship and it made life better for everyone around, and just a simple turnkey. So that's, I guess, what I want to say in this quick grab. Rayo and Rayo, two researchers I just read a little bit about, say focus on purpose, processes, and people. And we know in the Adventist system, there's a lot rightly backing up good walk and talk with Christian principles. And we want that to shine through. It will never be perfect because human beings aren't perfect. But if we can build cultural capital around those wonderful values and make that the norm, then it will be always the better for that. So purpose, process, and always about people. And to me, leadership is at its most exciting and its most dynamic when we can, as leaders, invest in the individual and bring about collectively that robust transformational culture.
Thanks so much, GM. Russell, can I ask you to add to some of those terrific insights from GM to expound on the way we approach building cultural capital to support leaders and organisations?
Sure. Thank you, Lee and GM. Yeah, I'd like to tell you a short story, if I may. One of the other aspects of the Safe Work Australia guidelines, and I'm quoting, is to put up signs at the workplace such as zero tolerance of aggression, clearly communicating to clients and customers that any form of violence or aggression is not tolerated. A couple of years ago, we did some work in a school. This was a government school. And this particular school had a range of challenges, to put it mildly. And one of the challenges, the one I wanted to talk about today, was with a particular group of parents in the school whose behaviour towards the staff was less than satisfactory. We're talking about people coming up to the front counter and pounding their fist, demanding to see the principal, demanding that the rules of the school be changed for their child, ringing up the staff and screaming, swearing, etc. And so we went into the school and we ran a range of programs. We did some workshops, and in the middle of the topping and tailing of the workshops, we did our Class Act program, which I'll speak about briefly in a moment. But one of the outcomes of the Class Act program is to give people the skills, the strategies, the language, and indeed the confidence to be able to reset a communication interaction by politely and respectfully calling the behaviour out. In the case of this school, everyone within the school was authorised by the principal to politely call out bad behaviour. So I went back to the school a number of months later to do a different workshop, and one of the staff came up to me, someone who works in the office, and said to me, I just wanted to let you know that we're using the strategies from Class Act. If a parent phones and is being really unpleasant and rude, we say something along the lines of, Mr. So-and-so, Mrs. So-and-so, very happy to help you with whatever you need, but I have to insist that the communication be in a polite and respectful way. And the thing that moved me the most about that conversation was when I said to this person, tell me, have you ever needed to do that more than once with the same parent? And she said, no, only ever once for each parent. After that, the relationship is reset. And in neuroscientific terms, what's happening here is the parent was seeking to put that person into a threat response, and the person on the other end was using a strategy to make sure that that didn't happen. Now, a Class Act program results in the creation of an organisational-wide charter. And in the case of this school, the principal put the charter onto core flutes. It was like when you go to vote at an election, huge pull-up banners all over the school. So anybody walking around could see quite clearly what was required with regard to culture in that school and the way we do things around here. So thank you for letting me share that little story with you. And I think, Leah, am I throwing back to you? I think Brad's next.
Absolutely. I'll just intercept Brad for a second, picking up on Russell's great points there. It's really interesting. The very existence of Safe Work Australia's guidelines point to a change, a trend that I've seen over the last decade, of increasing attention to the fundamental proposition and notion of respect in the workplace. The attention is there. I don't think it's matched at the moment with ability in terms of supporting leaders with organizational development strategy and solutions, but the appetite and attention is on the word respect. So it was really over a decade ago when I first started working in this space and working with leaders and teams in organizations to as I described it then, to help them talk about how we talk to each other. It seemed to me that it was the point of least focus. The thing we talked about least is how we talked to each other, how we treated each other, interaction by interaction. And it was as though I'd put a pair of glasses on one day and just opened up this incredible blind spot in organizational communication practice, where we were always focusing on the subject matter, and we were always focusing on looking for communication solutions around sharing, disseminating information, sharing messages, supporting change initiatives. How can we reach out? What do we say? And through what channels do we reach the staff in our organisation? But no leaders were talking about the manner in which we speak to each other, and making that very, I guess, simple, it sounds like today, but discovery, manner and the manner of our interactions towards each other and treatment of each other has really become our increasing obsession. As Russell said, supported by ongoing research in the applied neurosciences, which really gives us some incredible and ongoing insights around the design of the brain and its incredible capacity to thrive when we share signals and interactions of trust with each other. How the brain flourishes in that state. It thinks faster, it's more creative, it solves problems better, it listens better. And the converse is true. When we pick up signals of threat, whether, as I alluded to before, it's just a stern, cold, withholding face that in a pattern of behavior will tell us that we are vulnerable to this person. All the subtlest signals, let alone more profound behaviors, put us into that threat response, which disable those very capabilities we're after from our people and from ourselves day to day. Thank you, Brad.
Thanks, Lee. It's interesting, I guess, building on your point around the fact that the thing we talk about least is the way that we talk to each other. Melissa on the chat comments was just sort of chatting before around how just the simple act of speaking to someone about how they're feeling and about their behavior can be such a transformational step. And it sort of reminded me about how commonly what we're probably asked most about as coaches is about how to have that difficult conversation or how to be able to traverse a difficult subject matter, and these leaders who feel like they have to have this conversation because they've allowed what is a simple sort of workforce matter sort of go unmanaged, or it's festered and then it's become more complicated or more challenging or more difficult. And I guess in the spirit of the Safe Work Guidelines, it's less around our responsibility as leaders to constantly have to be the arbitrator or the mediator, but instead about creating a workplace where there's a shared responsibility for every single person. So every person, regardless of level, this isn't something that is the sole responsibility or the domain of someone who's classed as a leader, even in the most sort of broadest of sense, but actually give everybody the capability, the confidence, and the shared language for how we treat each other in a workplace. So to be able to navigate conversations, great or difficult, big or small, water cooler through the boardroom, this is about every single person within an organization family feeling confident and capable to be able to have a conversation and to be able to make sure that each and every conversation, it feels safe, it's respectful, it's authentic. And more than that, when the conversations might go awry or where someone's behavior slips, that they can safely call that behavior, and they can do that individually at that point in time. So that isn't something they need to go and report back to a leader, and then the leader needs to arbitrate or get involved. It allows the relationship to be instantly repaired in that moment, and the conversation to be able to continue with an increased awareness about how all of us have committed to creating a safe, psychologically safe workplace, and that we need to remember that there are standards that we're going to hold all of us to in terms of how we communicate with each other.
Thank you, Brad. Russell, love you to add into that conversation as well. If you would, I will just add, it's really interesting, you know, that point around having those conversations and empowering everybody with the skills for those conversations. Really, going back to the point around that lack of talk around how we talk to each other. I believe fundamentally the missing piece in that is really the shared language. Without a language to respectfully, kindly, in a caring way, raise manner problems when we are experiencing them around us in a pattern. Without that language, we can't steer change. Human beings need a language to grab hold of and manage and steer through any challenge we have in life. The reason we don't have the language is because we're not adequately, I think, in our organizations, diagnosing and identifying these manner pitfalls at a practical, specific level. And I think specificity is, I would encourage you all to be as specific as you can in that journey to equip and empower people around you, up, down, sideways, with that respectful and considerate collegial manner. And to have those conversations where it's absent, that really keeping that conversation honest and respectful and consistent is so powerful. Modeling yourselves that kind of manner, and acknowledging when your manner falls short, because all of us sitting here know that that's true of us all from time to time, is some of the most powerful material for leading change that you have on offer is your own stories and experience and your honesty in them. Sorry, Russell.
No, that's fine. Thanks, Lee. On that point about common language, we rolled our Class Act program out a few years ago to a large organisation with 8,000 people. When we were doing the wrap-up workshops at the end, people were actually commenting that within that organisation, the term Class Act has actually been part of their in-house jargon. So as a way of gently calling out disrespectful behaviour, if any still exists, is to say something like, mate, you're not being very class act today, are you? Or sorry, folks, that wasn't very class act of me. So in an almost jocular way, because they'd had that shared experience and everyone knew what that meant, they didn't have to drill down any further.
Absolutely.
So the final point for my contribution, Lee, was to talk about data and the idea of measuring this, and part of our Culture of Excellence program, of which Class Act is a key feature, is about sitting down with the organisation, looking at what's happening already. What is the organisation already doing? What policies and practices, so that we can build on from there. And we all know that data is important, but only important to a point. It's got to then lead to an action. And following up maybe 12 months later with similar survey questions to see distance travelled, but always being conscious of using that information to revisit. So just recently, we did the Class Act program for a university, very large university with 2,000 staff, and they contacted us recently just to go in and do a piece of work just with one small team, just for one team that was struggling and needed a bit of a top up and a little bit of coaching, and just to sort of get back on the rails. So, but we also are very conscious of working with leaders within organisations so that strategy can be managed in-house as well. So, Lee, I'll throw back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Russell. That's terrific. It is so important, identifying, building your evidence case for change as well. Really, the surveys in our programs we prize for that reason, because we don't deliver surveys to leaders for their people to find out what's wrong so much as to help them steer it right. Of course, as Martin Seligman, the pioneer of the positive psychology movement, which I have some kind of, I guess, a mixed appreciation for. There's a statement of Seligman's I really appreciate, where he says we can't build to the positive unless we attend to the negative, and it is important to do both, to be honest and specific around negative patterns between our people, so that once we shine that light and create some transparency and shared awareness around them, we really do make that shift to a shared accountability, and we give people, with those practical insights around negative communication behaviours, we give people the tools to recalibrate the nature of their own social and interpersonal interactions. We put it in their hands to do. And the data plays an important role, because sharing that as people participate in our programs, the sharing their in confidence anonymous stories and insights gives leaders an opportunity to focus on or identify, right, well, these patterns we need to work on. And now we've got the shared language, the shared tools, the shared awareness to build on to really accelerate sort of change results. But I don't want to, when I talk about the programs, this isn't to pitch you about them. I want to be really clear about that. Class Act is an organisation-wide scaled approach, but the insights we're giving you around shared awareness and shared language, shared accountability and responsibility, supported by practical, specific conversations around our manner shortcomings that are common in all workplaces, everywhere we go. These insights you can support and use to support change today and every day, with or without us. David, I know you're keen to introduce Jack and Rhonda and Steve to say a few words, but I wouldn't mind asking if anybody has any questions, and giving people a chance to just throw a few questions or comments our way as well. I'm happy for people to sort of lob in those questions now. Brad, if you would like to pick them up in the comments, if anyone would like to question directly, would love to take them.
I will. There was a comment more than a question from Sylvia that suggested that I guess this should be engraved in our culture and is essentially how we do us day to day. And I thought that was particularly.
I love that.
It
Great,
really
Sylvia.
is the way we do us. That's what we're talking about here, and the way that we do us in a safe, respectful way that makes people feel valued and connected in the way that they work.
So absolutely, I love that comment. Really, this identify respectful behaviour as key to your brand internally and externally when you're supporting each other and when you're supporting your people. I think, Brad, did I just see a question along the lines of where to from here?
Yeah, and also maybe you could share as our expert one practical tip, just so that I can sign off on that question on the chat.
I'm so sorry, I had missed that. Practical tip. We will share with you at the close of this session some resources. Russell ran a workshop for a group of TAFE leaders this morning and shared one of the handouts we love, which is a list of threat and trust behaviours that are derived from my research into the applied neuroscience of communication behaviour and interpersonal communication. There's no doubt, there's no question that the brain is a social reading organ, and so many of its mighty systems are pointed to the functions of scanning for the signals of other people around us to determine our sense of safety and the potential risk or threat we are under. The brain has really identified that through the long experience of life for each of us, that those most likely sources of perhaps small threat will come from the faces and voices of other people. So in terms of turning that into a tip, I mentioned before the word practical. It's something that I repeat over and over and over again. The list of behaviours we will share with you, you will see one thing above all others: it is practical. We get very specific based on that research around the kind of signals interpersonally that in a pattern trigger a likely threat response in the brain of the receiver. And so when obviously preventative approaches are really powerful, where we work across an organisation, but even without that, if you've got someone in your midst who is a common source of these threat behaviours and perpetrator of them, then kindly and specifically raise the manner. Kindly means, you know, it might look like, for example, look, I have to say something that's been really troubling me, or I'd love to talk to you about. I love working with you, but I must say, you know, I really struggle at times because I notice that when you speak to me, your voice is often very terse or curt. And I wonder if there's something wrong that, you know, something that I've done to trouble you that we should address. Regardless of that question, kindly and politely and caringly given, because you've specifically gone to and given a very practical description of what you receive, it really, in a supported way, raises that manner to their own attention. They may not be aware, they may be aware. That's not our job to evaluate. What our job as professionals is, and certainly as leaders, is to check in and kindly inquire, to bring this to their attention, because we find, as Russell said, that once we raise that conversation and talk about manner, that we only have to do it once, and you will see that behaviour disappear. David, can I ask you to, if there are more questions, we might pick them up towards the end, Brad, but David, can I ask you to introduce our special guests, please?
Certainly, you can see them, or for me, at the bottom of my screen.
It's a big list.
Rhonda Bell, who is the Education Director for the West Australian Conference. We have Steve Cowley, who is the Education Director for South Australia. And we have Jack Ryan, who is the Education Director for the 10 schools in Queensland. And all of them have the privilege, opportunity, challenge of building trust and respect within all the teachers and the schools that they work with. And they've all got some very practical experience and applications that they will be sharing.
Thank you, David. Jack, I'll scroll down the camera to find you, but it'd be great to hear a little bit of your experience. I know you as a leader have been so committed to fostering a culture of trust, high trust and respect across your people. And it's been an absolute pleasure, Jack, to work with you for many years, and any of your insights around your work to that end, we'd welcome hearing.
Thanks, Leanne, and hi, everyone. It's nice to see you all. I can't stay for long, so I'll make my comments as pithy as I can and hopefully communicate what we've learned. The first thing I want to do is just to tell you that I'm not on commission to CoP. But this
awkward moment.
Yeah, this is a team that we've worked really closely with. Leanne, I first heard Leanne present at a meeting in South Australia, and her narrative around it's a phrase that has stuck with me. It's probably the phrase that has struck the biggest chord across our leadership teams is the manners before matter. That no matter is important, that we can never forget our manners. And that was something that was core to the culture of what that we were trying to establish across all of our schools and early learning centres. And it was something that was very attractive to us. And there's really three things that I want to highlight for you. The first one is that This is a formal program. However, it has the power, as is evidenced in our patch, to actually change paradigms, tone, behavior, culture. Our teams just work in a different way. We've worked really hard on the concept of teams, and that everyone has a first team, a second team, and a third team. We've widened those first team circles because we're speaking to each other more transparently, more respectfully, not over each other, and certainly with kindness. The second thing is that we now have, at this stage, it's informal, but it's soon to be formed charters across all of our schools about how we behave. There's an understood culture. Everyone knows it. And like I said, it's been over a number of years, as Leanne has said, but it's embedded, and there are people from our patch. I see Brenda, who will attest to this. Our working relationships across the teams and within the teams are much more respectful, and we're looking to formalize in our schools the involvement with parents and with students, a charter for all of those segments, and so it's really looking positive for us. The last thing is that there's less fear, there's less anxiety, there's more respectful transparency and accountability across our segments. For the details, you need to speak to Coach, and this is probably the last thing I want to say is that we work with many providers, but probably not one that is as so respectful and attentive to our needs. I call Leanne or Russell or Brad or Glennis. They actually help us do our 360s. We have LEAD and the TAPS program, and we're working on a possible one for our chaplains called CHAPS. But we were early adopters in Queensland, and I can't give enough credit to Class Act and the work that it's doing in our patch. So Leanne, I don't know whether anyone had specific questions. Probably not. The rest of the time I'll give to Stephen and to Rhonda. I have to excuse myself because I'm actually presenting at another meeting about 10.
I'm so sorry to do. We return that devotion and respect and appreciation right back to you. You know we do.
And folk, if there's anyone who wanted to reach out personally, I'm more than happy. If you just email me at jackryan@adventist.org.au, I can give you more information how we commenced the journey. Any of our principals or Early Learning Centre segment leaders would be happy to talk to you too.
Thank you, Jack. All the best for your presentation.
Thanks, everyone. Sorry I had to leave.
Please. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jack.
Hi, Rhonda. How are you?
Hi, Leanne. Hi, everyone. Yeah.
It's
Sorry, I
lovely to
wasn't
see
able
you.
to join at 11:30, or I think it was 1:30 for you guys. Yeah, we ended up having a bit of a crisis here, so I've been in crisis management mode this morning.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Anyway, it's all settling really well. So I have to say, I've just scrolled through the screen and I'm looking at who's here, and I'm sure there's people that could comment on this that have much more expertise than I do. In fact, I'm quite certain of that.
I would challenge you on that, Rhonda. Please go ahead.
I think I won't like repeat what Jack has said, because certainly what he has said has been our experience with Coach. We have found that I think within our smaller organisation here in WA, where we all know each other, there's been, adding to what Jack has said, there's been times when Coach, Leanne, Russell specifically, have been able to help us through difficult situations where the conflicts of interest are so great, where we all know each other, where we worship together, we're related to each other. And if you go back, you only need to go back a couple of generations in WA and you'll be related to the person that you're sitting in the room with. And that's just how it is within our school system. and so an extension of what Jack has been working on with Coach has been external coaching, so external professional coaching, where we've been benefited greatly from working with external coaches, specifically Leanne and Russell, to work through situations that would be very difficult for someone that knows intimately what's going on. So having that outside, sorry to call you outsiders because we love you so much, to have that outside objective,
Independence.
fresh look, fresh pair of eyes. And Leanne and Russell have helped us quite recently, and I won't go into details, to work through quite a difficult situation. And probably difficult situation is just an understatement. Working through the culture with one of our schools and some of the, I will call, toxic cultures on one of our sites, helping us to vision what we want our culture to be, assisting our principal and coaching our principal through that process in such a supportive way. We have the charter, we love our charter, and we love the process that we went through. I'm just having a look quickly at the comments. Someone said grace, and I'd just like to share with you what I believe the cornerstone of our charter is. I'm going to read it off the wall because I wasn't quite prepared for this meeting. It says, we all need to ask for grace at some point, offer the same grace to others that we seek for ourselves. And I think that does certainly add to a positive culture, when that self-awareness of recognising that we don't always get it right, not always having to be right, and knowing that, we need to not just only offer grace, we also need to be ready to accept grace when we get it wrong. So yeah, I just again, like Jack, I'm not getting. I don't. What do you call it? Like this is
no commission here.
No commission. Thank you. Yeah. I can't affirm the work that this team has done enough. We've been using coach communication since 2012. So Glenys first did professional appraisals for us when I was a principal here. And yeah, we've certainly valued from that 360 process as well. But grace, I think grace is the cornerstone. I think that's the biblical principle too, that Christ asks us to work within.
Thank you, Rhonda.
Leanne.
You sure did. Thank you so much, Rhonda. Your words mean the world, and it's a pleasure to work with you. You know how much we value our work with you and your people. Absolutely, I resonate with what you said. One of the propositions that we continue to repeat to all and overall is that none of the subject matters we discuss require any of us to abandon our mutual respect and our professional courtesy. And I've often called that proposition the mechanics of grace. Getting really specific about what that manner is that supports our subject matter conversations and what the manner is that is not. And I love what you've said there. I feel humbled to hear all that you and Jack have shared, and slightly awkward because I feel like I need to say to everybody that we're keen in the session, not for self-praise, it's lovely to hear it, but to also give you some real value, and I hope that you're all finding that as well. So Steve, over to you, and say something less delightful about us, please, so we don't feel so awkward.
Sure. Well, I'll start by saying that if you'd like to send Rhonda and Jack's commission to me with mine, I'm so happy. There's no pride here, and I'd be more than happy for that to take place as soon as you want to transfer that money. But I'll share a little.
I'm a lot more comfortable now.
Yeah, good. I hope that eased your concern. I was blessed to have been working with Jack in Queensland up until the end of 2018. And so I was aware of the services of Coach and things like that. And I moved down to here in 2019, and coming into an organization where, unlike Rhonda, I brought no history, no baggage, no connections. Everything was new. And so in the course of most of that year, I started to realize that probably some underlying concerns that I saw within our schools was that internally they were experiencing versions of what I now could label as like the trust and threat responses. And that's predominantly, I initially saw that happening amongst colleagues. So teachers, support staff and teachers, those kind of combinations. But as I started to sort of get to know the schools a little better, I also realized that there was a real lack of what I'll call staff voice, being able to air concerns to school leadership. And so if there were issues that were taking place, in some regards, leadership really were quite happy if they didn't have to deal with it. And that creates a bit of an us and them paradigm. And so I had grand plans that the year 2020 was going to be fantastic. There was going to be so much that we would achieve. And of course, I don't need to name the reason why it got sidelined. So it ended up being that during 2020, Russell and I started communicating, because I then said, well, let's push these plans out and maybe make some optimistic, plans for 2021. So we've really only just started to have these public conversations about manner and matter and relations in the professional workplace. And Russell presented last week to all of our teachers. So that's about 140 of us gathered together. And really what I'm wanting this initial step to be is raising awareness that there are appropriate ways that we should interact with each other. That there are some ways that we may have learned, or there are some ways that people have gotten away with because they're just always that grumpy one and always the moody one, that it's not okay that they just remain that person. And credit to Russell, we've had such wonderful feedback from what happened last week, still getting it popping up on my email and my text line. So really for us, the essence is we're focusing around what does quality communication look like. We're making sure that the expectations around what that communication should be. And the other half of communicating is actually listening and active listening. And, you know, my hope is that we'll also be moving into those spaces where people are actually paying attention when maybe colleagues or people that report to them are actually coming in. I'm sure none of you experienced this, but I still see examples where people will be, I'll go into someone's office and I can't get them to even look at me. They're on their computer, they're on their phone, and they can't turn it off. They won't put it down. We need to change that culture. I'm intending that that'll be the case. So I suppose for us, it's having identified a culture that we want to change and move that culture to a place where there's greater well-being. And you know, we all want to have people that are happy to come to work. They may not always like doing it week in and week out, but at least they're happy to come along when they've got to do it. What's this opened up is an opportunity. When I saw that there was this almost disconnect between an us and them, what I realized is that there's a middle group, middle managers, I'll call them, who often don't know where their allegiance lies. Are they supporting the staff? Are they supporting the school admin? Where exactly are they at? And so with Russell's help, we've actually developed some leadership sessions. We're running as just 1 hour. We're doing it basically every month, aren't we, Russell? We're going to do 8 this year. We've done 2 already. And it's just giving them some empowerment in their role and understanding about leadership styles, ways to communicate, how to deal with people with different personalities. And this is really, I reckon, sort of joining these groups of people together. They're feeling empowered, and I think that's part of the cultural change we're after. So I'll leave my comments there. Ditto to everything that Rhonda and Jack said. I completely agree with all of that. So
thank you so much, Stephen. It is just such a pleasure to work with you. We're delighted that you have carriage of the wonderful education teams in SA, and it's exciting to be on that journey with you. And I loved your comment about listening, and indeed, you know, feedback is listening, showing you're listening and actually listening. And I often say, you know, listening is an active sport, and the piece all of us are so able to miss at any turn in our communication, in our interactions, is that of really acknowledging what we've just heard. And we may have internally registered what someone has said to us, but there are so many times we don't stop and take that moment prior to our own response or contribution back, insight we want to share, and first say, I get that. I understand. That's really interesting. I hadn't looked at it that way, but that's a great point. I'd like to talk to you more about that. Acknowledge the other. And we can do that in the micro of our interactions and in the macro of our organizational and leadership supports through processes like 360s, where we cultivate listening as a feature of to prize in our leadership culture. So Steve, thank you so much. I'm really conscious of our time, and I would love to make sure that no questions or comments go unaddressed. You're welcome, any of you who wish to stay on, and if there's something you would really like to ask immediately. Otherwise, what we will do is we will do two things. We'll reach out and share those handouts with you, just to give you some tools that you can start using, because I want to just put that pair of glasses on all of you to have a really look at manner and the role it's having in your teams and organizations, and give you some tools straight away to support change in the absolute research-backed spirit and intent of the SWA guidelines. Brad, you'll have captured any other questions we haven't got to, and I'll make sure that we address those as we email them out. And we will also schedule an information session for you. I'm conscious, we've got, for instance, in our stable of supports, we have an amazing partnership program with the Bully Zero Foundation and with the heads of workplace safety authorities, Martin Campbell, who chairs the National Safe Work Authority Committee. With that level of amazing backing, we have an organisation workforce-wide program that actually is a comprehensive way to acquit against the guidelines and make serious and sustainable culture change. But of course, at the other end, we've got the micro stuff we do where we're supporting teams, dealing with kind of helping you massage out some knotty stuff and behavioural issues, and we can work at the team and local context as well. So we will schedule a session that's just purely focused on giving you information about those resources. And please, if that doesn't sound useful, just please ignore it when it comes into your inbox. But otherwise, if it does sound useful, then please hit accept, and we'll make that time 2 to 3 weeks from now. Thank you so very much, everyone, for your time. We do know how prized it is in a working week, and for many of us a short one this week, and it's been a privilege to share this with you. I really hope you found it useful. Apologies for the lovely praise from our wonderful education system leaders, but nonetheless, it's been a pleasure, and thanks for your time.
Yeah.
Thanks, Lynn. Thanks to Lindsay, and thanks to David.
Absolutely.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.